Coach's perception of inter-team competition, a conceptual inquiry. One of the most important researchers on the field of competition is Morton Deutsch. He provided a framework of competition and cooperation which was the basis of future research to come. Competition with a negative interdependence of goals is characterized as a zero-sum assumption. So basically, the more one competitor wins, the other one loses. The heavy emphasis on winning is the approach to competition can be seen in many quotes out of the economic and sports world. One of the most famous quotes is certainly, "Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing," by Vince Lombardi. Much research has been conducted to determine the outcomes of competition and cooperation. Johnson & Johnson provided a collection of more than 100 studies which presented cooperative setting as the most beneficial in terms of group productivity and interpersonal relationships. However, remaining the focus on competition, Deutsch identified that there are two different types of competition, namely constructive and destructive. While destructive was described before as a zero-sum assumption, constructive competition leads to a win-win situation. Deutsch mentions the example of a tennis match, in which the winner provides feedback on how the loser might improve. Both competitors will advance from the situation with a game. Following Deutsch's constructive competition, Botterill and Bredemeyer and Shields identified the pursuit of excellence in the sports setting as a win-win situation. They refer to competition as a situational factor which helps competitors to gain. It is important to notice that competition in team sports does not only take place on an intergroup level, but also on an intragroup level. In other words, competition might occur between teams, but also within a team. Especially when one refers to competition within a team, the terminology inter-team competition, healthy competition, and friendly rivalry is commonly used. Even though competition within teams is a common feature of modern sports, the research on this field is unstructured and lacks detail. The purpose of this study is the conceptualization of inter-team competition from a coach's perspective and the identification of influencing factors and effective concepts of inter-team competition. Methods included in-depth interviews with 3 coaches involved in female sport at the university level. All interviews were between 30 and 90 minutes in length. Although an interview guide was used, the relaxed and informal nature of the interviews led to concrete ideas. It is through inductive reasoning that the researchers were able to observe similar and different patterns, establish themes, and conceptualize inter-team competition. For our results, we found that inter-team competition is an important feature of university-level sport, as all participants confirmed that inter-team competition takes place on their team. They related inter-team competition to have an effect on and or be affected by the social context, leadership by the coach, cohesion, and performance. Before we get to the concept of inter-team competition, it is important to see how our participants define competition in general. One participant said, "I think it is a test of your own performance, of your abilities. It's putting yourself against someone, sometimes even against yourself, sometimes it is other people, sometimes it is a previous team, but basically it is testing yourself against someone or something." So competition is a process in which one compares one's performance to achievements by oneself or others. But how can we relate this definition to inter-team competition? Our participants define inter-team competition as a competitive process which takes place within the boundaries, rules, and customs of a team. In other words, inter-team competition refers to a competitive process within a team. The process is regulated by the rules and customs of the team. Usually the rules of the specific sport are the basis for competitive situations. Depending on the circumstances, the rules might be extended. Inter-team competition can take place on 3 levels, namely individual, inter-individual, and on a team subgroup level, which are not mutually exclusive. It involves a comparison of a person to other individuals on the basis of a standard or a score. The individual level refers to an individual who tries to beat a standard or a score based on prior achievements. In inter-individual competition, 2 athletes compete against each other. On a team subgroup level, competition within a team might occur between groups of players. Our participants frequently use all levels of inter-team competition. They identified the purpose of this practice in an increase of performance within a team. The notion of inter-team competition as pushing each other to get better was commonly used. Furthermore, they have identified team cohesion as a concept that is influenced by inter-team competition as well. As a result of the interviews, we found leadership to be an influencing factor of inter-team competition. Good coaches have a way to help players excel and inspire them to compete. In a sense, it is the purpose of the coach to create the competitive environment, and to do so, he or she must have a clear focus, clear communication, attention to detail, and have the ability to motivate. As one coach states, being a coach, his or her goal is to have a team that comes to practice and they want to work as hard as they can. They are just competitive. They fight in there, but they do it with passion. Secondly, it was found among all coaches that a strong component of their leadership is to create a strong competitive environment. With this competitive environment, there was also well-established rules and framework. As one coach states, competition is very defined, structured, and promoted on the court. Finally, the competitive environment engages the individual. Coaches tend to see more in practices than in games at this level. Competing in a defined environment develops the individual for games. One coach noted, "I post statistics on the wall, fitness testing, who is doing the best in push-ups, T-tests, who is the fastest, wins and losses, and those types of things, so the players can see for themselves and get engaged to see where they sit within the team." So who competes? It was found that some coaches believe that there are individual differences in competitiveness within their athletes. However, they stated that their most competitive players are also their best players. In all, coaches may see different examples of competitiveness of his or her players in their established social setting. One coach stated, "High-level athletes have an internal drive, and if you don't like competing, you're not going to be very good." All coaches have expectations, and how we adjust to competitive situations can be learned. Therefore, you have to build competition as a habit. As with any habit, it takes discipline and repetition. One coach stated, "If we don't learn, we are probably dead." The influence of inter-team competition on performance has been summarized by one participant as, "The more competitive we are with others that we have in the team, but remaining the respect for each, the more enjoyment we will have in the games because we will be fitter, we will be able to read the game faster, close down space quicker, maintain possession longer, create more chances, and by doing all those things well, it should lead to more victories, or at least have more opportunities to victory." So, through inter-team competition, a competitive behavior will be trained. This pressure to perform well enhances the performance of the players, the very essential function of the coach. However, it does not only lie in the provision of competitive situations, but also in the evaluation of such situations. One participant said on the assessment of performance in competitive situations, "How they compete and how they do in practice dictates who's going to start, who's going to play. Bench players always want to play more, and I always tell them to play well for 2 weeks in practice and show me consistency." It is important to mention that performance of athletes is not seen as static, so there are hardly any win-loss records in practice. The assessment of athletic performance by a coach focuses on a process. The coach evaluates the development of skills in a competitive situation over time. Furthermore, coaches try to foster a winning mentality. "I want to see what players want to win. I want to see what players want to compete. Players who don't want to lose are very valuable," and you can see that in practice. In this quote, we can see that coaches assume that there are individual differences between athletes in winning mentality or competitiveness. However, previous research has shown that competitiveness and achievement motivation influence enjoyment of performance. So through fostering competitiveness, coaches try to positively affect the achievement motivation of their athletes. The impact of inter-team competition on cohesion has been described by one of our participants as, "It binds us together. There are a number of things for cohesion as a team off the court that certainly builds us. But if you compete and compete hard against each other, you have a shared purpose. You have a sense of purpose and success, and when it carries over into wins too, then it becomes important. If players compete and play hard in practice, they feel good about themselves." Even though the notion of competing hard against each other will help the group to compete hard against others, the influence of competition on cohesion is rather uncertain. Some coaches mention positive effects. Others mention that situations of conflict might arise out of competition. Furthermore, in this context, there is no distinction between task and social cohesion, which will be necessary for future research. As a summary, our participants identified that the social context, the leadership, team cohesion, and performance play a key role in the process of inter-team competition. Purposely, this graphic does not include any directions indicating which concept might influence or be affected by inter-team competition. However, this might be the focus of future research. We recognize that several limitations apply to our study. First, we interviewed only 3 coaches of female teams at the university level. Secondly, we cannot identify the interrelations of the concepts which were addressed by our participants. Further research is also needed to confirm and validate our findings. Nevertheless, our study identified inter-team competition as an important feature of athletic sport at the university level. We consider this study as a starting point for future research which might address the following questions. Does inter-team competition have an influence on athletic performance? That is, does a competitive environment during practice help athletes improve? Secondly, how is leadership related to inter-team competition? How do different leadership styles influence competition within a team? Thirdly, does competition within a team increase team cohesion? And finally, to what degree does inter-team competition influence the competitiveness of athletes?